Okay, I see that we're live here. I don't know why I didn't get a notification on my phone, but it seems like we are up and running. Well, good Friday morning to you. Welcome to our online Bible study. I hope you're doing well, particularly in the aftermath of these violent storms that passed through on Wednesday. Very unprecedented for our area, and something very unique. And of course, a lot of devastation, a lot of destruction, and there was loss of life. I think at last count, they're saying 25 or 26 confirmed deaths just here in New Jersey. Still, several people are missing, and it's to see these tornadoes come through South Jersey. We know that's just something we don't expect. What was interesting to me was the loss of life was not due to the tornadoes. Those people, got in their basement, they did what they were supposed to and survived. The loss of life has been due to the flash flooding, and in different areas just overtook people, and the rescues from homes and from vehicles and so forth. And so we need to be praying for these folks in their situation and in the recovery and all the rest that's involved. Just a little while ago, got a personal message from Pastor Danny Nagati, and had heard of the news of what was taking place here in the States, and assuring us of their prayers. And what an encouragement that is, that we've got folks in other places praying for us, and as we face these challenges and difficulties. And so certainly that's the forefront of our mind as well. Well, we're here at our Bible study now, and we're in Romans chapter 12 still, and looking at verses 14 through 16. In verses 14 through 16 gives us 5 laws for healthy relationships. And of course, if you've been following this as you go through this chapter, it just builds one thing upon another. It tells us how to look at ourselves, and then it talks about our giftedness. It talks about how we exercise that giftedness on the behalf of others and in the love of God. And of course, we do these things in relation to other people. And so he gives us some practical teaching, some practical information in regards to how to exercise these things and have these healthy relationships. And so we introduced this last time. Pardon me. We'll be in this for a few weeks. When you look at these verses 12 through 14, we've dealt with last time. He said, "Bless those who persecute you, and bless and do not curse." There's a positive and a negative there. The word bless, eulogia, we get the word eulogy. It means a good word. We give a good word in a eulogy. And so it says, when you have opportunity, give a good word. Don't curse people. Don't run them down, even if, they're an adversary. And unfortunately, in this life, we know that we have adversaries. And I emphasize once again, hopefully it will not be because of our disposition, but it may be because of the position that we take, our testimony, or the things that we believe. And we shouldn't be arrogant about those things. We speak the truth in love. But again, listen, we're going to have some enemies. Jesus told his disciples, he said, there's going to be people who hate you because they hate me. And see, because we love Jesus, we identify with Jesus. Those people who don't love Jesus are not going to love us. And he says, but when you encounter that, they persecute you. He says, don't curse them. He says, if you can, find a good word to say about them. Now today, we're going to be talking here in verse 15, where he says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep." The rest of the text is verse 16, "Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own estimation." And so after we understand, number one, the law of adversity, there's going to be adversity, but we exercise the positive and the negative. We we bless people instead of cursing people. And it's important that we understand that. Because, as Jesus said, when he talked about this same principle, he said, you have heard that it's said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That Old Testament principle of equal retribution or equal retaliation. We know that human nature is not satisfied with equal retribution. We want to be up one. And he says, look, I'm going to give you a whole different way of thinking, a whole different way of operating. And it's going to be blessing those adversaries and not cursing them. So that's the law of adversity. The second law is the law of empathy. And that's from verse 15 that we read. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. If I were to summarize that, I would just simply say be sensitive to the feelings of others. I think women are much more apt to this than sometimes men are. And I know that's something sometimes I have a struggle with. But the idea of being sensitive to emotions and feelings. And so we're to be empathetic, the law of empathy. Now, you understand the difference between sympathy and empathy. There's a difference there. Sympathy is feeling sorry for someone. Whereas when we talk about empathy, we're talking about feeling sorrow with somebody. You embrace their sorrow. You're not just seeing it from a distance and feeling sorry for them, but in empathy, we embrace the sorrow that they're feeling. And we feel that sorrow with them. And we see there's two extremes here, right? Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Now, most people would think that it's a lot easier to rejoice with somebody than it is to weep with somebody. But that's not always the case, is it? You've heard that statement, laugh and the whole world laughs with you, but you cry and you cry alone. Well, in reality, sometimes it can be more difficult to rejoice with people who are rejoicing, especially if you feel at the moment you don't have anything to rejoice about. And somebody's rejoicing in their good fortune. Somebody's rejoicing in the blessings of their lives, and you're taking inventory of your own, and you're saying, boy, I'm not experiencing that right now. But that's when we exercise this. We rejoice with those who rejoice. You see, the problem is if we feel we don't have anything to rejoice about and somebody else does, then we feel resentful, we feel envious, we can feel jealous. And so it can be harder to rejoice over someone else's victories, over someone else's blessings. But you look at the other side of the coin, it says, and weep with those who weep. And, you know, that's a remarkable thing. Again, it's not sympathy, it's empathy. It's literally embracing their sorrow. And what it's saying is that I'm going to adjust my mood to them. I'm going to be sensitive to the depth of what they're feeling in their sorrow at that moment. And so that's where this law of empathy comes in, to weep with those who weep. Now, I want to make an exclusion here. There's some people, you ever heard that phrase, misery loves company? And I've known more than my fair share of people who just seem to enjoy misery. They're not, this is an oxymoron, they're not happy unless they're miserable. And misery does love company. Now, that's not what this principle of apathy is, of sympathy is about. No, this principle of sympathy is about somebody who's experiencing true, genuine sorrow, and not something that's manufactured of their own being, you see. But it's the idea of the genuine sorrow. And in reality, you have to be a real friend. You have to be somebody who can really connect with an individual to be able to share their sorrow at that level, to be able to genuinely mourn or cry with them in the midst of their difficulties and in their sorrows. And so sometimes when we go through that sorrow, we know that tears are shed. There's a beautiful verse found in the Psalms, Psalm 56:8. It simply says, "O Lord, you number my wanderings." Now listen. He says, "Put my tears in your bottle. Are they not all in your book?" Put your tears, my tears, in your bottle. The fact that God is not oblivious to our sorrow. He understands the nature of our tears, probably better than anybody else. It's interesting, I've read years ago that during the Civil War, the wives and the mothers of the soldiers who were fighting those battles actually had little bottles that they called tear vials. And they would capture their tears in those bottles for their loved one as they wept over their loved ones in the midst of this conflict. And then they would send those bottles off to the battlefield. And those soldiers would receive those vials of tears of their loved ones, and they would carry them with them into battle. Think of the significance, knowing that somebody has shed tears for you for the sorrow and the difficulty that you're facing. Here it says, in the psalmist is writing in that effect, that God, you not only see my tears, you hold my tears. There is a deep connection in that, and it's a beautiful picture of what God does. You know, there are those, and maybe you're of that number today, who have wept literally rivers of tears because of the pain and heartache of your life. And I want you to know that the tears are not wasted. They are not unknown to God. God knows our sorrow, and God meets us in our sorrow, and He carries those tears with Him as well when we face those difficulties. And so we share that with the Lord. I found this interesting, that in the temple in Jerusalem during the days of Jesus, they had a very unusual custom. For one, when people were coming to the temple to worship, of course, bringing their sacrifice and so forth, and we're getting a pre-picture of that in our study of the tabernacle in our Sunday school class. But unlike the tabernacle, which only had one entrance, the temple had actually entrances from all four sides. And but people, as they would enter the temple courtyard, they would enter the courtyard through the southern gate or the southern steps. There is an area there that has been even more recently excavated, and they are the actual steps from the days of Jesus. And I have been there on a couple of occasions, and to think that you can stand on those steps, that's where Jesus and His disciples literally ascended into the southern gate of the temple. But when the people were coming in, they were instructed to enter through the southern gate. And so they would enter the courtyard, that outer area surrounding the temple, through the southern entrance. And then they were instructed to exit through the northern corner of the temple. They would do their business there, and then the northeastern corner. And I've gone out the northeastern corner of the Temple Mount. As soon as you go out of the Temple Mount, there's an area that's called the Sheep Gate. And of course, it's determined that that is where the sheep were brought from Bethlehem, that were raised for the purpose of the sacrifice in the temple during the days of Christ. And you would go out of that northeastern exit. What's interesting to me is if you go out of that exit and then you go towards the west, you actually encounter what we know as the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows, where Jesus would have traveled towards the place of crucifixion. But they were to enter in the south, they were to exit at the northeastern gate. And there was one exception to that rule. Whenever there was a Jewish family in Jerusalem that had gone through a genuine heartache, the sorrow, the family was allowed to come to the Temple Mount in exactly the opposite direction. They would enter from the northeastern gate, and then they would exit from the southern gate down the southern steps. Now think about what that would mean. That would mean that all these people going through the Temple Mount, this family would be going the opposite direction. They would see this family who was grieving. They would see this family who was most likely shedding tears. And they would look into the face of these people who were sorrowing. And the purpose of that was this, so that they might weep with those who are weeping. Isn't that a beautiful picture of what we're told to do here? And that's exactly what they did. And, I wonder sometimes we come to church and do we really look into the face of the people that we worship with? When we pass them, particularly between the Sunday school time and the worship time, there's a lot of movement in our building, and we pass a lot of people. But do we really look into their face, and are there people who are just in their very countenance, you realize they're carrying burdens? There was someone Sunday morning, and I told my wife this afterwards. I said, boy, there's an individual, the look on their face was as though they were carrying a burden. There was something, and I just have been praying for them because, it may be something they don't feel at liberty to share, but I just perceived there was something heavy in their lives. But I took time to look into their face as we passed. Do we do that? Certainly we should rejoice with those who rejoice, but we need to weep with those who weep. There is a story, it's a true story, about a lady in Charleston, South Carolina. She went to console her grandmother because one of her contemporaries had died. The granddaughter said to her grandmother, she said, I know you're going to miss your friend. And the grandmother surprisingly replied, she says, well, yeah, she said, I'll miss her, but we weren't really close friends. The granddaughter said, what? She said, I know you spent time together, you laughed together, you talked together. And the grandmother said something very wise about their relationship. She said, well, yes, we talked together and we laughed together, but we're only acquaintances because we never cried together. And true friends know how to share tears. See, we all have a lot of acquaintances, don't we? But you're blessed indeed if you have a friend with whom you can share tears. And we understand the nature of true friendship beyond just simple acquaintances is something that I think that we've moved into a society of social media that has redefined what friendship is. And we need to get back to the biblical concept of it. But the reality of it is that real friendship are people who, listen, when you have something to rejoice about, they'll be glad for you, and they'll rejoice sincerely with you. And when your heart is breaking, those are the people who will weep with you. And not just feel sorry for you, they'll feel sorry with you. Now, before I wrap up today, let me tell you, the greatest example of this is Jesus himself, right? Remember, his first miracle was performed at the wedding of Canaan. And what was going on there? It was a celebration. It was a wedding. And Jesus is there, and he turned the water into wine. Why? Because he was rejoicing with those who were rejoicing. We don't often think about that. But this was a celebration. And Jesus was there, and he and the disciples were celebrating with them. He was rejoicing with those who were rejoicing. That was the first miracle that he performed. Do you remember the last miracle that he performed? Well, it was in the raising of his friend Lazarus. Remember, as he came to Lazarus' tomb, you remember what the Bible said? It said that Jesus wept. The Jews who saw that, their observation was this: oh, how he loved him. In other words, what? Those tears were sincere. There's some question in regards to what Jesus was weeping for. Maybe weeping to the fact that people didn't fully understand the nature that he was the resurrection of life. I'm sure he was weeping because of those sisters were weeping, and he was sharing their tears. And yes, genuinely weeping because he lost someone he loved, but he knew that he had the power to bring him back. So Jesus wept with those who wept. What a great example for you and I, right? And so this is the law that we have when it comes to the idea of empathy and coming alongside people sincerely and rejoicing with those who rejoice and weeping with those who weep. Let us pray. Father, thank you for this principle. Lord, it's something we need more of. We need more of it in our world, but we certainly need more of it in our churches, among our congregations. I thought about that as Pastor Danny Nagati reached out to me this morning in regards to the devastation that we've seen here. Well, not just New Jersey and Pennsylvania, but down Louisiana, and the destruction, the loss of life. And even in his communication, I know that he's a man who will rejoice with us when we rejoice, and I feel in a sense, and his prayers for us, he's weeping with those who weep, those who have lost their loved ones, those who have lost memories and security in their homes because of these tornadoes and destruction and flooding. There's an example right there. Father, I pray that we would glean this principle of empathy. Lord, minister to others sincerely by rejoicing with those who rejoice and weeping with those who weep. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, again, thank you for joining me. Don't forget, this Sunday, Reverend Peter Odanga will be with us from Kenya, Word Life Kenya, there in Diani Beach, and be ministering to us. Looking forward to that. Don't forget about Anniversary Sunday and our Fall Revival beginning on September 12th. If you haven't signed up for the dinner yet, go ahead and get that done so we can get you on the list. And so got a lot of things going on here in September. The restarting of our youth programs, all of them. We continued on with our 7th through 12th grade, the Illuminate, at the beginning of this year, but we wound up suspending our WANA program. So we're looking forward to getting that all up the end of this month. And so keep those things in mind. Be praying for them. Pray for our services with Peter, and then also have Royce Williams coming to minister to us through our anniversary celebration. And we need to prepare for those things through prayer. Thank you again for joining me. Hope you're having a good day. Look forward to connecting with you again very soon.